why is suffering holy? You know, the Four Noble Truths, the first truth is suffering. Why is suffering considered holy? When I first learned the Four Noble Truths, this question came to mind. It's like, why is it holy? I mean, it's so uncomfortable, right? To have this pain in myself. It's not just a pain in my mind, but it's like tension in my body and a feeling of just really darkness inside. Have you ever been have you been to a place in yourself when you feel like your mind is really dark? Anybody? I have. It's a place that is so dark that it seems like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. It seems as if there's really nothing worth living. And it's painful. But why is it noble? When we look into our suffering, when we stay with our suffering, we discover that there are causes and conditions that have brought about our suffering. We understand deeply why and how the suffering had come about. And it's coming in touch with the rawness of our suffering, with our vulnerability, our fragility, that we can tap in something else inside ourselves, and that's love for ourselves. I remember when I first, during my first few years as a nun, I had this suffering that I really didn't understand how it came about. I mean, I can't really pinpoint to the causes and conditions of my suffering. And sometimes I would go up to the Plum orchard and just cry by myself. Just really feel that suffering. And what I realized was that most of my suffering comes from my childhood and my adolescent years, when I didn't know how to deal with things that come my way, such as, judgment or criticism. And I felt so much compassion for myself because I was vulnerable. I didn't know how to deal with all this suffering. And so the suffering was still there. And being able to come and touch my suffering, I tap into this source of compassion and love in myself. And it's when I can touch my suffering that I can be in other people's shoes, really understand why they suffer. And so, understanding our suffering, coming back to our suffering, helps us to cultivate compassion, cultivate understanding. And suffering also is noble because it takes us deep into ourselves. That it takes us to a place that's more than just the everyday comforts, needs. And most of us, it takes us onto a spiritual path, like this one that we are on together. And so Thầy talked about mud and lotus, and I just really love this metaphor that for lotus to grow, that it needs the mud, because without the mud and muddy water, lotuses cannot grow. And it's the same thing with our suffering, is that we need suffering to cultivate compassion, to cultivate joy and happiness. At first we thought, how can suffering and joy and happiness go together? But with the practice of meditation, we see that these two are interconnected. That suffering is needed to cultivate joy and happiness, compassion.